Democratic State Representative Vikki Goodwin of Southwest Austin, thank you so much and welcome to Eye on Politics.
Thank you for having me.
So you are running for lieutenant governor.
Yes.
Why is that, and how difficult a decision was this? Because you're going to have to give up your state house seat, right?
Yes, well, I think the time is right. We need a change. I disagree with Dan Patrick on so many of the policies that he has, but also on the corruption that we see of him taking millions of dollars before he was the head judge in an impeachment trial. The way that he rules the Senate with an iron fist really doesn't encourage any debate over there, and members basically fear him. And so, we've had 30 years of Republican leadership. I think that many people would argue it's time for a change. I am one of them, and yes, I have to give up my seat in order to run, but it's very frustrating as a Democrat in the minority party when we get crumbs, during legislative sessions. I've been able to pass some good legislation in the past, but I still feel like there's so much more we could be doing to improve this state, to improve the outcome of people in this state. And so that's why I'm running for lieutenant governor.
And so when you talk about that, what are your main platforms? What would you like to see done that is not being done?
Well, I've always run because I'm passionate about our public education. This session we saw $1 billion going to private schools, and I anticipate with the current leadership that will continue to grow over the years. I'm not in favor of sending our public tax dollars to unaccountable private schools. That's number one. Housing affordability. I would say that all of our leaders have talked about that as being a big issue, but what we saw come out of session, in my opinion, doesn't do enough to address that issue. Water and energy, infrastructure is a big deal, and again, water was prioritized this session. We talked about a lot of things, new water, leaky pipes, but not really a whole lot about conservation. And then healthcare. I think there's a lot that we need to do around healthcare, whether it's women having the ability to make their own personal private healthcare decisions, or whether it is in rural areas, people just having access to good primary care. So a lot of reasons.
So you brought up a lot of topics. Let's talk a little bit about the Education Savings Account bill that passed. You voted against it. And if you are to be elected, there will still likely be a lot of Republicans in the Senate.
Sure.
And so how would you convince them to undo that? Because you would want to do that, right? Somebody would put forward a bill, a Democrat, and that would seemingly be a tough road to climb.
Yeah, I don't want to try to forecast or have look into the future, but certainly that would be my priority, is to bring those dollars back into the public education system. If it's, who knows what the outcome will be and what the makeup of the legislature will be. But again, my priority would be towards our public schools. And honestly, we heard during the hearings from so many people that are in private schools, what makes them so great is small class sizes. Well, I think our public schools would love to be able to have the ability to have smaller class sizes, to allow their teachers to have more planning time, to maybe, we started to unwind the STAR test so that we're not teaching to the test and having teachers spend so much time on that. So there's a lot of things that we can do to improve the outcomes within our public schools, and I would focus on that.
And as far as abortion, because you talked a little bit about, care for women. So what do you hope, what would you want to do? And again, you've got the reality of a Republican-dominated legislature.
Absolutely, but I would go back to what we had with Roe v. Wade and putting that into law. I think that it just makes sense for women to have the ability to make their own health care decisions. I think we passed the Life of the Mother Act this session because we saw that women were negatively impacted with the case of Amanda Zarowski, who wants to have children, was pregnant, had a medical emergency during that pregnancy, wasn't able to get the care she needed, had to go out of state, had to delay her care, and now possibly can't have children herself because of that. So, We took a tiny little step this time. We didn't address things like fatal fetal anomalies. Maybe that's something that we could address with a shift in the legislature. Maybe an exception for rape and incest would be something that we could address with a shift in the legislature. You know, sometimes things do take time to get where we want to go ultimately, and I'm just willing to work in the direction of letting women have that right.
I've read that another part of your policies would be to expand Medicaid, which the state has not done. And I know I keep going back to that, but how would you convince Republicans, because they haven't done it yet, to do that?
It's hard for me to understand why Republicans don't get it, because they're losing healthcare providers, hospitals in rural areas, and that impacts their folks. So we have expanded Medicare in some ways, where we allow women that have just given birth to stay on Medicaid up to a year. But you know, the reality is Medicaid helps mostly children. 76% of the enrollees are children in the Children's Health Insurance Program, and we need to show the results that when kids get early care, primary care, they're going to be healthier later on, and that helps us all. You know, what is the expression? An pound of prevention, an ounce of prevention equals a pound of cure. You know, I think honestly, Republicans this time passed MAHA, the Make America Healthy Again, at the state level, saying younger people need to get some classes in high school on nutrition. They need to have more PEs and you know, eat better, exercise. And we also added that for university students, making sure they're getting some classes in nutrition. So the idea is we need to think about our healthcare system earlier on, so we're not spending so much later on. Is that expanding Medicaid? Of course, that would be one direction I would take, but there's other options out there.
Let's talk a little bit about the politics. We've talked about policies, but it really goes back to how does someone who's from Austin run against a Republican who's been in office for 3 terms, is run statewide and is known statewide, has raised a lot of money. How do you really beat somebody like Dan Patrick? Because as you know, no Democrat has beat a Republican statewide in over 3 decades.
I think it's all about relationships, building relationships with people around things that they care about, right? People get interested in turning out to vote when they care about the candidate because the candidate cares about them. The candidate's not just showing up just before an election saying, hey, vote for me, I'm a great person. But really, I've spent the last year traveling the state and looking at the issues all around the state. Just to give you a few examples, I went down to Laredo after we passed a drowning prevention bill because Senator Zaffirini passed the bill with me, and we spoke to the city council members and the folks down there. Prior to that law passing, which is Cotty's Act, they didn't allow life jackets in the city pool, but because of the law passing, they do, and you know, hopefully that will save a life. I traveled to West Texas with the Energy Environmental Regulation Committee when I was on that committee. I went out to see Lake Beamer, which is a toxic lake that was created because of an abandoned oil well, basically. Talked to some of the ranchers out there. One of the ranchers has come to the Capitol to advocate for plugging wells because it's impacted himself and other ranchers out there. I'm sure, you know, showing them that I have an interest. He invited all the legislators to come and see his property where there used to be a spring, completely dried up. He took me to show me a part of the Pecos River where they've got, again, abandoned oil wells and oil materials. I took an interest in that. He invited all the legislators. I was the only one who showed up. So I think by spending time with people all throughout the state with so many different interests and showing them, I want to help you solve your problems. I'm not interested in the divisive issues. Let's put those aside and let's solve the problems that really make a difference in your life.
And I'm hearing you say that, and it still costs money to go across the state.
Right.
It still costs money to get your message out. You know, Texas is a big state, got a lot of expensive TV markets like the one we're in, like the one you're from.
Right.
And so how do you really do that? It's easier said than done, right? right?
Yeah, you know, the first time I ran, I was not in politics at all prior to running in 2018, and I had a political consultant tell me you need to raise $400,000, and I was like, wow, that sounds like a lot of money. I did, and I won. Second time around, I had a target on my back because I had won the one Republican seat in Travis County, and they wanted it back. That time I had to spend $1 million on my campaign. I was able to raise $1 million in a state house district in 2020. So they say this will be a multi-million-dollar race, and I'm in it to raise the money and to get my message out.
And do you expect to have any competition from fellow Democrats in the primary?
I mean, I haven't heard yet. Sure, there could be. And honestly, either way works for me. When there are multiple people in a primary, you get more attention, right? There's going to be candidate forums where we can bring more people into, make them more aware of the campaign, so that's not bad. If there isn't a primary opponent, I can save that money and spend it all on the general election. So either way works for me.
I did have one other policy question to ask you before asking about a little bit about the session. And I noticed in your release there's nothing about restricting gun sales. Where are you on that issue? Because I know certainly in the 2023 session it was a very big issue after the horrific school shooting in Uvalde. We didn't hear that much this session about it. So where are you on that issue?
I mean, I still believe that we should raise the age for buying assault-style weapons from 18 to 21. I feel very strongly about gun violence prevention. My first 3 sessions, I was on the committee that hears all of the gun bills, Homeland Security and Public Safety. It's a tough committee to be on because I know that in Texas we're not going to restrict gun ownership, but we should make sensible regulation around it, like making sure people go through background checks, making sure they have an understanding of the law and responsible gun ownership. We did get something done around safe storage. Donna Howard was pushing that issue when I got into the legislature, and I helped her with that. But I understand this is a tough issue, so I went to DPS and I said, "You're law enforcement. Surely you care about who's on the streets carrying guns. What can we do to help you and law enforcement?" And they gave me an idea for a bill that I worked on the next session, and I almost got it passed the House.
What was that?
So right now there's handgun licenses. If you have a handgun license, you can go into a gun store and bypass a background check. So you could have gotten that license a year ago or more, and since then you could have assaulted somebody, gone before a judge, and the judge says you no longer have the right to have your handgun license. It's been revoked or suspended, what have you. But that person didn't have it on them at the time, and they haven't returned it. They could still go into a gun store and buy a gun bypassing the background check. So my bill simply said you have to run that license number through a database, which you can do in a second. I showed the members on the phone. And that way, if it is revoked or suspended, that person cannot buy a gun.
And so how,
Simple.
Let me ask you about the session overall. We just wrapped it up. How did you think it went?
The one word I would use is ridiculous.
Why?
I do think we did some good, but I also think that there were a lot of things that could have gone better. So, for example, our school funding bill, yes, we increased our school funding by $8.5 billion, but we put a lot of strings and did not give our school districts flexibility. We have over 1,200 school districts. They all have different needs. And when we say you have to spend it in this way, on this item, at this time, and do this paperwork, that just makes a lot of problems for our school districts. So it is a lot of money, and also the governor and speaker have publicized, or rather the lieutenant governor and speaker have publicized, here are these great things we did. I just was digging into some of it today. They're saying we are providing full day pre-K, but it turns out the bill only pays for half a day. So there's some things that they put out there that are a little misleading. So that's just one example.
For teachers, though, they will get that, right? Or not pre-K, but child care.
Well,
right?
see, again, it says that the children of teachers get free full day pre-K, but TEA is only providing the funding for half of a day.
So it's not all that they say.
Right.
And let me ask you about an issue that has become very contentious in the last several weeks, and that is SB3, the ban on THC products, which the legislature passed. How did you vote on that and why?
I voted against a full out ban. I don't believe that we should ban. I think we should treat THC like alcohol. We need to regulate it. Can't buy it before you're 21. Packaging needs to be very clearly labeled, shouldn't be marketed to kids. I don't think that we should sell it right around schools. So I think there's a lot of regulations we can put in place, but I think if we have an all-out ban, people are going to go to the black market.
And a lot of people right now are asking this question. The Republicans say they have a lot of wins. Do the Democrats have any wins this session?
Sure, I think the Democrats had some wins. One thing that came out very late in session that I was happy about is we are going to join the summer EBT program, so providing food for kids in low-income families during the summertime. But unfortunately, that won't happen until 2027. So that opportunity came from the federal government starting in 2024. We said, the state of Texas said, we can't take those dollars because we're not prepared to distribute them. We missed the opportunity again in 2025. I was hopeful that we would be able to do that in 2026, but it looks like we need yet another year to implement it.
State Representative Vikki Goodwin and candidate for Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.